After all this, you still
think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
Well, Josh, I don't know about you, but I've fallen out of a coconut tree.
You know, I think in this moment, we truly do exist in the context of all that has been and what came before us.
That is probably the perfect. I mean, just these past couple months, right, has been this calming sense, and like this is just something that I've been talking to with friends, with my own life. Just this overwhelming of like, how am I supposed to plan for the future? It feels like I might not necessarily have the power to do so, and more importantly, that all the conditions you would use to predict something are completely on the fritz. And then is the old Lenin quote, right? There are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen, and that certainly seems to be the case. Post this last presidential debate, here we were thinking that it was just going to be this kind of quiet blow machinery at play with inflation, Gaza, and the presidential race as these two babbling before at it, right? And then suddenly the donors shift and cause the arc of history to move with it. How have you been making sense of these past couple of days?
Yeah, I mean, it's been like fascinating, right? I mean, there's been obviously we talked about this last time as well, right? There's been this movement to kind of get Biden off the ticket post that debate, right? And the more I thought about the debate, right, I think it wasn't so much that the debate in and of itself was like this unmitigated disaster as much as it was like this recognition by Democrats that, oh shit, this is what everyone else sees with him.
Yeah.
So it prevented them from like denying reality anymore, right? Because it was like, yeah, like people were like, oh, well, like the polls barely moved and whatnot. I'm like, yeah, it's because this is kind of what a lot of people already expected of Joe. Or if you're a Republican, you probably expected even worse. So there's been that push. It has, it's been back and forth. The past week, which shared its time with the RNC, which I think was maybe, and obviously we had the Donald Trump attempted assassination as well. That and it's funny, like that feels like it's like old history at this point. Like who cares? But there was that. We didn't have a chance to cover that yet. And I'm kind of glad we didn't cover it immediately.
Right.
Like so much came out like in the intervening days that like, hey, it wasn't quite what the narrative was being shaped around, right? But you had like, kind of this sympathy thing, right? The belief was, oh, okay, this is what's going to lock up the, victory for Donald Trump. Especially if Joe doesn't go. And one of the arguments for keeping Joe Biden was just like, if you're just consigned that like, hey, we're just gonna lose, like, then who cares, right? Like, right. Just like, why even bother making a risk? But I would say the RNC, for various reasons, not the least of which was Trump's final speech, the one that had reportedly been altered to be more about unity, was horrible. One of the worst speeches I've ever seen at any convention. And it suddenly makes him look way more beatable if you have anyone but Joe Biden. So, the next day, Joe Biden supposedly comes down with COVID. And then by Sunday, he's gone. Right. He dropped out yesterday. Has almost immediately endorsed Kamala Harris. Right. I mean, like there's the initial statement, and then like a few minutes later, he endorses Kamala. Almost all of her like the rivals that could more meaningfully challenge her have endorsed her. You've had Newsom endorse her, Whitmer, all of your other menagerie of Midwest governors have endorsed her. like the possibility for being challenged at the convention, or we're like leaving it up to people like Joe Manchin and stuff like that. And, I guess maybe the people who ran in the primary, Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips, and not that he could win the nomination, but Cenk Uygur also seems to favor an open convention, which I thought would have been an unmitigated disaster, but I don't think we're going to have like a real open convention. It might be like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge open, but it's not going to be like a proper like mini primary like some people have argued they should do.
I'm still holding out for Lincoln Chafee at the convention this year, but let's wait and see.
Lincoln Chafee is like a great example of someone where like you see him, it's like kind of cringe, but maybe makes a few decent points, and then you like learn his history, like, oh god, like fuck this guy. And like that's just kind of like the Lincoln Chafee journey.
Oh my gosh. No, I mean just to piggyback on everything you've said, right? Like you've recapped what is essentially the course of like 6 days, right?
Yeah.
This is I'm being serious, and like I've been listening to other podcasts, I've been following the news, and the whole time like everyone is like wildly and aggressively speculating on what comes next. The biggest one being, what if Biden didn't step down? Which was like, glad I didn't get on that ship, because
right, yeah, and I mean, we
the podcasters coup.
We were like, yeah, the podcaster coup is what it's being collectively called now. I don't even think podcasters were really like the source of influence there, right?
No,
like,
not at all. Like...
Yeah. But I mean, there's nothing that tells you like. I mean, there's no greater state of like self-importance than being a podcaster. So I guess I can't, I can't blame the podcasting class, the podjoisie, if you would, for wanting to name this supposed coup after themselves.
I mean, I don't know. We don't make any money off of Patreon, so aren't we the podletariat on this one?
I think we are. Yeah.
Gosh, and it's just like I'm very hesitant to continue making any predictions or any sure bets now, because everything was hinged on this assumption that Biden was never going to let go of the reins, and now that he's managed to, I still
a little bit more optimistic he would. But it's still like, it is shocking, like, as like kind of seeing like the emerging narrative from this, right? It's like no one's ever like gave away the reins of power like this when they didn't have to in this country.
Right. And it's like, I mean, this is the other thing that we talked about this episode, and like the point still kind of stands, and I think because it's been put to the background because of these recent developments, maybe people will have the amnesia about this, but it does beg the question, people had concerns about Biden's performance in 2020 itself, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, again,
and it's like now you look at those performances and you're like, oh, wow, this is like a genius compared to what we, like, either of them, options we had, as of last week.
Right. And like the Wall Street Journal just recently published like a 5-minute like video showing like all the recent gaffes leading up to Biden stepping down, which is like, okay, you guys broadcasted all this before. You did you just have this in like, in the back pocket?
Oh yeah.
But like everyone's kind of been quick especially in the endorsements of Kamala, right? And as the party, even Hillary Clinton, who seemed sour in her endorsement, like everybody is doing this dual act of like, okay, Kamala's in, we're all going to coalesce, which is, I would reckon, smart, given bought everyone a lot of necessary time and puts opportunity back in the race, but also like provided an opportunity then to quickly sanitize Biden's record and Biden's legacy, right?
Sure.
And kind of, of the shame of his debate performance, and a little more broadly too, like just his recent mishandling in Gaza, down to like just his strange tenure as president. Now it's safe to say it, now that everyone else is saying it, it's going to bring in just how much of his administration and how much of his governance was impacted, by his ability to be lucid or not, right? And you can, of course, it's not the first time something like this has happened. You have with Reagan, suspicions about this with Reagan. You definitely have the historical record about this with Wilson in his latter years, right? It's not like...
Well, Wilson, like, if the record is to be believed, he had it worse than anyone else in the White House.
Right, I mean, like, literally his wife dictating, like, foreign and domestic policy at that point.
Yeah, like, supposedly communicating his will, but, it, like, very much just, like, palace politics that we're used to seeing in, like, high medieval fantasy and stuff like that.
Right. And I think this is just, like, probably the first Trump and then Biden, right, is, like, this unmasking of the nakedness and brutality when you have to separate it from the gilded light of like American civil, right? Because Trump is a bridge too far for liberal adherents, right? And then you have the right who see God, I guess, right? But like, he's a bridge too far. That creates apostasy. And now there's like, it's created this new bridge where I think more people correctly are now a little more ideology in the American state writ more large. But then with Biden, the hope was that he kind of restores, I think, as a dual consequence of, the genie being out the bottle with Trump, and then Biden's own on top of that.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like, Biden was sort of the impression that we all had when he was elected, was sort of someone to sort of rewrite the ship, right? To put us back on course, sort of maybe shrink, like, the Overton window a little bit more, and, in the wake, especially in the wake of, like, January 6th, that was going to be achievable. And it wasn't, as you've said before. Like, it's not... and I think there's some things that he was successful with. We've mentioned before that he's never been a great communicator, which makes him a really bad campaigner, evidently, which is why he kind of had to go. And obviously, you have stuff with Gaza and whatnot that was always going to sort of threaten the administration. That's probably still going to be like the one. Like, I think the two things that don't really go away, right, is like, for the left, the Gaza situation, I don't think we're going to see a huge shift with Harris. I think we might be seeing a little bit of a rhetorical one. She's apparently signaled that she will not be presiding over the Senate for Netanyahu's address to Congress this week. That's more rhetorical than it is maybe material, but I mean it's still a major shift, right? And even like the rhetorical shifts when it comes to Israel are pretty big. And like one that we're probably personally less invested with, but the immigration issue has been kind of this lingering point against the administration for the past like year or two, and that's not going to go away. But it's really kind of like the only major administrative failing. Maybe you could make a case for inflation as well, but those are the only like major administrative failings that I think like are like negative things about Biden as president that are inherited by Harris, as opposed to just Biden the doddering old man who is vaguely incoherent.
Right. And I think also just with immigration, now that I'm starting to conceive of it a little different, like, of course, Trump and Biden have taken it in a pretty horrible direction, but this direction kind of definitely like accelerated under the Obama years, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like at some, I think I had been deeply skeptical, deeply cynical about, this idea of that like, does history really happen in the United States when the ship of state, as it pertains to both parties, kind of runs seamlessly. It's going in this very libertarian right direction, and it's going to take major institutional resistance to fight that, while the culture war is the only app. So in that cynical bubble getting popped with Biden actually stepping down, it does kind of, either some of these things are still, prone to the historical process of changing circumstance. That doesn't change. But at the same time, it does bring up the question, right? That's like, okay, with this, we now reckon with this, I don't know, like the more faceless aspect of the American state, right? And where and how it's operated. Is Harris actually going to be able to address it? I think that's the question on everyone's mind.
Sure, yeah. Real quick, you are cutting out ever so slightly.
Oh boy. Yeah, I don't know. It's raining on my end, so that's usually when my internet starts to freak out.
Okay, yeah, that sounded better. So we'll see if I just wanted to, if there was anything you could do to fix that before it's too late. But
I mean, worst case, I might be able to splice some things, but we'll see.
Okay, all right, we'll edit this out. But yeah. So what do you want to talk about next with what Kamala Harris means now that we've got her potentially as the her most likely going to be the nominee, right? I mean, it's just a quick little factoid that I found. By 9 p.m. yesterday, she had raised over $50 million within the first 24 hours of her candidacy, 81 million. And that's across 888,000 donors. So, like, I mean, I don't see how you can run against that in like a pseudo mini primary, if you want to call it that.
Right.
That's a huge shift in enthusiasm and whatnot. Like, and like, I mean, so much of it too with Biden gone, like, it's like all of these things that you were saying, like that, like, everyone's been saying about him, right? It's like, oh, he's kind of incoherent. He's old. He'd be the oldest person nominated to ever, serve as a party's nominee for the presidency. Now, all of those negatives are shifted to Trump, who it also applies to. But now there's not like that weird contrast of like, do I want like a more stately dementia patient versus a, an unhinged lunatic one?
And they have George Clooney to thank for this.
Yeah, based George Clooney, and they say celebrities should stay out of politics.
I mean, there were a bunch of other things. Like, I mean, just the rumor mill this past week, crazy with like rumors of Obama's behind the scenes involvement.
Yeah, Pelosi and Schumer, which did lead to some fun interactions because he said only God Almighty would convince him to leave. So you'll have to guess we'll have to figure out which one was which one's our maker, right? But apparently he walks among us. Or she, who knows?
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, we've commented, I mean, in the past episode too, right? Like, it really did take this horrible debate performance for everyone to wise up. And I am pleasantly surprised, because there was a bit of me that just like, nah, fuck you guys. This is what you wanted. Now, like, sit here and like, eat your cake, right? But at the same time, like, they can finally, get scrambling when it comes down to it. Let's see if they can keep that in any positive direction. But I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, 1 minute. I've got to answer a call real quick.
Yeah.
All right, I'm back.
All right. So, I mean, with, about now, I guess, 106 days or so to election day? where's the party at? Because as of the time, I think we've seen basically the broad base of the Democratic Party kind of coalesce around Kamala. All the major players have made their endorsements at this point. And like you've stated, an overwhelming amount of donor money in addition to the Biden coffers have now gone to Kamala at this point, right?
Right. I mean, I think there might be a little bit of a slowdown with the coffers. I know the GOP is trying to sue them to prevent her from inheriting them before the convention. The convention is mid-August. Like literally, it's wrapping up a month from today, August 19th through the 22nd. Yeah, I mean, it's I think and I think the whole thing too with the argument for doing like an open primary. I mean, I have a number of issues with it. Like for like a proper open one, right? But it's like you kind of need, I just said 106 days before the election. Every like second is like time that you need to spend like, making your case. And I mean, just the sheer unorthodox nature of all this, right? It's gotten a ton of coverage, right? I mean, people have been talking about people have been talking about like the 20 different, potential VP picks, right? Which kind of highlights, and I mean, a lot of them aren't even like unreasonable choices, right? But it shows that there's a much more flourishing backbench for like the Democratic Party especially than the Republican one, right? I mean, unironically, NBC said the best speech at the RNC convention was Hulk Hogan's. And I don't think he's the future of the Republican Party. I could be wrong, but if I had to put money on anyone who's not the future, it's probably Hulk Hogan. But you have that, so you've got a lot of momentum that I think is ready to be utilized. And doing the open primary thing too. It's like it doesn't really like even kind of satisfy like that small d democratic principle, right? Like where it's like if you have that sort of, well, like, we weren't voting for Kamala in the primary. A lot of people weren't voting in the primary anyways. I mean, there's the real democratic choice is, the November one, right? In terms of like actual like, popular appeal, at least for the Democratic side anyways. But as I said, it's kind of, like there's not really a whole lot of merit, in my opinion, to run out like a bunch of candidates that like only like delegates get to vote for and like make decisions on. Like the idea that like, oh, well, like the reason we got in here is because we didn't like vet Joe Biden appropriately by like doing the primary stuff. It's like, what would have been really the difference, right? I mean, he seems to have been in a fairly rapid state of decline in the past few months, really. Because the State of the Union silenced a lot of concerns about him mentally and whatnot. So if he was doing primary debates around that time, he probably would have been okay. Maybe he would have been off script, so there might have been an issue. But I don't think that would have been like, oh, hey, yeah, like Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips, let's fucking go. Like, I don't think anyone wants them as, like anywhere near the top of the ticket.
And we've already talked in past episodes, right, about how like all these other contenders nomination are fundamentally unserious, right? Like if they were serious about mounting a primary challenge, they would have done better in Iowa. That, just to be frank, right?
Sure.
But it's even then. I would have more enthusiasm for this if there was like a sizable left momentum Democratic Party, to challenge Biden in that stage. And of course, now that things have changed, right? Like that course of history is unchangeable at this point, right? But like we've talked at length about how like Bernie and other figures in that camp, right, by putting all their chips on Biden, have kind of soured their own popularity or juice that they might have had, and we're seeing the fallout of that right now. I don't know how the Democratic Party, like the Bernie camp recovers from that. I think they've kind of poisoned themselves with that. But
with
at the same time,
with like them siding with Joe as far as like not siding out, like not him not dropping out.
kind of, yeah, because like I don't know, I've heard this take passed out with the French elections, right? That's like Mélenchon didn't unilaterally side with Macron the first time he did. He kind of got rewarded this time around with this big win for the French left this time around, right? And that's been helping them kind of beat back the tide of the right in France, right? Where I don't think the U.S. left has enjoyed that. And of course, now that that path is set, I think that time's been lost, right? But it is Democratic primary has gone, and like you're saying, this open primary is. I don't know, when was the intention announced to have an open primary?
The open convention.
The open convention, yeah.
I don't know that they've announced explicitly that they're going to do it. I think that they're like kind of like we're going to do it, but like kind of with like the wink and nudge that like yeah, like it's all for like show, right?
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of like podcasters and other influencers who have been like saying like, oh yeah, we should totally just do an open convention. But like, I mean, the people they want out of it are just horrible. Like, I mean,
that's
like Kyle Kalinske wants like Gavin Newsom, which is like, I mean, like that seems like a betrayal of like any ideals that you profess. I think some people are worried that like Kamala like wasn't polling great against Trump, but like any of those alternative polls, I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock into because they were purely theoretical. Like, some voters, I mean, you can't ask them to think about like theoreticals in an intelligent way, right? Like,
and now we're in a theoretical. You know what I'm saying? Like,
now it's reality. Like, that now there's like, okay, like let's see, and a lot of it, right? I mean, like, and I've said before, right? I think that the Democratic Party has made a major, mistake, kind of keeping, Kamala in the closet or whatever the past 4 years, right? Only kind of bring her out for like, when the administration flubs something.
Right.
I think that but I mean, at the same time, I mean, maybe there's an advantage to that, right? Maybe she's seen as, distant from the administration's failings. I don't know. Harris has always had a certain appeal with like a lot of the party base that I think was like what Joe Biden was losing anyways, right? She's very popular with women and people of color and stuff like that in the base, and I think re-energizing those groups that were potentially slipping, that it's potentially a game changer. Along with just as I said, you flip the negatives, you flip the script of the whole election. The RNC was still focused largely on Joe Biden sucks. Which, I mean, I get that they were like hoping that he would still be the nominee, but like, don't you think you would like hedge your bets? Like, I mean, yeah, there was some of the generic like, oh yeah, the liberals, right? They want to, reassign your kid to 50 different genders or whatever, like bullshit they're spouting. But like a lot of it was like really weirdly specific. A lot of it was like, if you weren't even like Trump's speech, if you didn't watch Fox News 24/7, you'd have no clue about half the things he's talking about.
And I think that's a big thing about political discourse in this year, especially, right? Is that so much of it has become inside baseball, right? That like,
and there's like 20 different teams, all in different leagues, basically.
Exactly. It's not, the teams in this case are more like media markets, but you're spot on with that, right? Where it's like within the Democratic camp, I'm inside baseball, and then within the Republicans, it's what flavor of neo-fascist are you today, right? And which
it's inside baseball and inside crochet.
It is, and like, I guess, I mean, that's probably as far as we can get with the Democrats, right? Because it's like, this is still a live wire. I'm hesitant to make any predictions about what's happening with Kamala and the Democrats, and I think we just like, we gotta wait and see convention, right? So I think the only prescribable action is hit the books, right? But with the orange, that has been interesting, and I will like to say I did not seek out any clips or content about RNC. I don't have a social media presence, to be honest. The thing about Twitter is if you were ever on or if you have friends who are on, the content will find its way to you.
Yeah.
You don't need to be on Twitter anymore. It's ubiquitous, apparently. So the RNC, and this is another thing that like I'm kind of glad we didn't jump straight into the coverage of this, because for that burrito, like right after the debate, all this like posturing about what is Biden going to do, then the Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Enough podcast airtime has been done about this and been made, but it's just like the next would be John Hinckley Jr., as it were, right? Confusing politics, weird, like just everything about it is like, if you take the news about him, he is he's so, it kind of leads to this weirdo like paranoia conspiracy stuff, and the amount of like that came up on YouTube about the Trump shooting is so like, I'm sorry, like conspiracy entertainment used to be fucking interesting. Like the downside of Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson, like getting better, is that all this conspiratainment has gotten worse. Sure. It's not even entertaining remotely anymore, right? But everyone's going off on like whatever the case may be. And I think the funniest aspect is Trump got shot. No one to the jokes. Everyone's going straight to like, oh, this has to be like a publicity stunt. Like it was to the point like me and you off. Well,
yeah, I want to like point out something real quick though with the conspiracy stunt thing. Is like I have talked to like so many different people from so many different like political views, like across the spectrum, and whatnot, and like the prevailing view, a common across all of them, was that it was fake and staged.
Yeah, because if you believe like stuff, right, is that Trump basically nearly missed the shot, and it's like I'm not going to make any jokes about it because the jokes have already been made. I'm not going to get into it. They even released the Trump saying many men have wished death on me with the AI cover, right? It's all over. The jokes have passed, right? It's done. Yeah. But like, this thought I had in my mind is like, ain't this the old wrestling trick where like you cut yourself with the razor when you hit the mat and then you come back up?
Yeah, and the blading.
There were two photos, right? It's like the first photo when the story broke is like Trump looking like he just shat himself and needs to be careful when his head's bleeding and his hair's a mess. But then
he's like
immediately
for his shoes and what?
Like... Right. But then that I refuse to believe that this photo is real. Maybe it's just like perfectly timed, but it's like where he like, and he's looking triumphant. The sun's hitting him, and he's pumping his fist. As soon as that became got put on everything, and liberals were like tripping over themselves to be like, Mr. President,
it should have been me.
I'm just like, you don't have to make a joke about it. You don't have to speak ill, but you can just like nod it. That's also fair, right? Like you could just be like, okay, that happened.
Well, then so many of them were like, oh yeah, like we've lied. He's not actually a threat to democracy. We need to stop saying that because like, look what might happen. Which was like just giving away the game in like, the worst way possible. Like it's, especially when it's like, well, all those things were true. And then like, of course, comes out, who the shooter is, right? Like, and it's like, okay, well, he political, but in like an apolitical-ish flavor, like, like it's definitely conservative from like everything we've gathered about him. I don't want to like pontificate too much, right? I mean, my suspicion was when we got, some of this information about him was that he was supposedly kicked out of the school shooting club, not like a club for shooting schools, but
full club, yeah,
a rifle club in the schools. He was kicked out because he had bad aim, and I was like, well, I was like, well, that might be his motivation right there, right? Like if things played out a little differently,
I mean, the crazy thing is like just the school shooter and media industrial complex like try to get on like how do we like get the true crime content out of this, and that was also just gross, right? But at the same time, it's like I think the only thing about it because just very little is coming out about like him. He didn't really what I've read. What I did find funny is that he was trying to investigate if Trump was tied to Epstein, and it's like, buddy, that's already out there. That's done and dusted.
Also like pretty like under like because I mean there was some stuff that I've read recently that was like really shocking, and I'm like, all right, I'm not saying like anyone like really carry this, so I'm not gonna like put a ton of stock in it, but like, how does this like miss the cycle?
It's I don't know. It just everything about that because I mean one of the Trump cases, right, is that he effectively controlled like this is one of his legal charges that he was basically trying to influence the media cycle, right? If you know that and you saw this whole stunt, like you can say a variety of things, but like
those were the charges he was found guilty for in New York. Part of them.
Yeah, right. So it's like everyone knows this, and then just tripped over their like the get well soon, Donnie. Like I don't know what that was about. And I think like the only take worth saying is that I this is a conversation I had with a couple friends, which is like, how do you read this in the context of stochastic American violence, right? These intermittent periods of shootings, of mass violence, of particularly like as xenophobic and far right discourse becomes more commonplace, and as like people like to put it bluntly, right, like our current state of reality is madness inducing. It is kind of Lovecraftian, a satanic panic way of just like people are driven to desperation and do bad things. This event in that context. That's the angle we were going with it. And then how do you get to it at the point where it's like, and the cadre of people and this far right media industrial how are they or in some way like responsible for these waves of violence? I think you had like one of these, I can't remember, was it like the Walmart shooter in Texas who like cited the Daily Caller as his inspiration or something like that? Like there's a bunch of cases.
Well, a lot of them have cited various. They've cited Tim Pool, they've cited the Daily Caller, they've cited Alex Jones. Like I mean, if you can name a right wing podcast, you could probably find a shooter who has identified them as an inspiration.
Exactly. So like that's the real, take here, right? Is that how do you reckon with the chickens coming home to roost for the right? That they get all these, guys excited to commit violence, and now the guns are pointed back at them. What do you say about that? And no one has anything to say about that.
Well, there's zero introspection, right? This is sort of like the moment where you'd kind of be like, like maybe we've lost control of our own monster. And there's no introspection to that. The RNC by the time the RNC started, we knew pretty much everything there was to know about this shooter, right? Like as far as like we know like the same amount that we about him then that we didn't know now, right? I don't know if anything more is going to come out about him. I find it unlikely at this stage. Given just the general scarcity of information period that was out about him publicly, but they just doubled down on the whole like they tried to kill our president. The left needs to turn down the temperature because they caused this and whatnot. And like the reality is, I mean, if he was like, oh, like Trump's on Epstein's list, he was probably like someone who was maybe more likely motivated by the fact that Trump had like softened his stance on abortion, or has like these other like less than traditional Republican Orthodox views. Like those are the things that might have been his motivation. But there's no like it's just like, how can we weaponize this as a political tool, despite all the times that they've told you that it's too soon after a shooting to do anything and you're just politicizing shootings, blah 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 blah. When it's one of their own, they're more than happy to ride that horse until it dies.
Exactly, and I think that's like the biggest failure of the discourse from the I call it the left, because I don't know what else to call this contingent, right? But it's like, I think the liberals in this cohort really tripped over their dicks to apologize to Trump, and it's like, you don't need to do that. There's a certain way you can be respectful and polite without having to suck up to anybody. There's a way you can do that, first and foremost.
Well, and really, like, I think Joe and Kamala needed to say something, which they did.
Yeah,
I'm not necessarily convinced like anyone else really had to say a whole heck of a lot.
That I agree with. I really do agree with that. And I also think the other thing too, right, is like I think everyone making the jokes about it, the window for that is over now, because the convention's over and we saw all the cringe that came with it. But like, I think it's just like, there's this tendency from like 2016 onwards to like, if the right co-ops something, you drop it and let them have it. You know what I'm saying? Or if
they co-opted the upside down flag.
Yeah, they co-opted the upside down flag, or like I think it's like the Pepe Frog memes when that was going on. Is you got to stop doing that, because the right. It's like the creator of the shit doesn't
Vikings.
Agree with the right. Right, Vikings. You got to let go of that. Like just a bunch. First of all, this is highly online behavior, like touch grass. But second, it's like, no, you don't fucking like owe these people anything rhetorically, ethically, right? Like, they think something belongs to them. No, it doesn't. Take it back. Second, like, if they try to play moral high ground games, either like, you got to start, you got to have the stones to tell them to fuck off, or you don't play the games with them.
Yeah.
And there's this consistent like respectability game where it's like, I don't know if it's like, this is just how like Western culture is acculturated, or if this is like a failure of like liberal ideology, or if it's like, and here's the thing, I sympathize with being conflict averse, because I am conflict averse. No one likes fucking fighting and arguing, right? But it's like, if someone's like coming at you with something that's categorically untrue about your character or intentions, you don't then have to like play respectability politics with these people. I don't think that's fair.
Yeah, and I think, and again too, right? It's sort of like, the whole civility, unity politics, blah blah blah. Like, there's a place for it, of course, but like,
yeah,
the issue is like when it's just sort of this unilateral disarmament. When it's like, well, why? Well, like, what's so special about nicking Trump's ear compared to all of the school shootings, all of the abortion clinic bombings, like all these other things that happen with a lot more frequency, and it's just like, it's America.
Exactly, right? It's like, I'm not saying that you have to like stick to your celebrate when something like this happens, because to be frank, like, the outbursts of stochastic violence in this country are actually disturbing, right? But at the same time, it's like, you have a opportunity politically, but then you have a moral responsibility. Like, if you're, if you hold the right accountable, and I do, that these kinds of events of stochastic violence have been justified and exacerbated on their watch and by purveyors of their media.
Mm-hmm.
You have to kind of put them on blast for that, and it's like, you can, of course, if no one, I don't think you have to rub it in their face. It's like, haha, your guy got shot. But you can definitely say, like, Now that
Sure.
now that you guys are finally having this like thing like pointed back at you, you have got to fucking like accept your role in this. They won't, right? Because I think like that's the fucking like problem. This is greenhouse gaslighting, the noun and verb. It's when you fucking like play with shameless people.
Yeah, and that was, sort of, I mentioned that with like that was the debate. Like that's just been like the Trump MO, right? It's just gaslighting you. Like there was like, just gaslighting anything he's ever said in the past. Like and I mean, just so much of the coverage that he gets and so much of like the RNC, you'd think like this man had never been president.
Right.
Right?
Oh
Like
my
this
God.
country is in like a disastrous state. Like, okay, well, like why didn't you like fix things 4 years ago?
Exactly.
During the best administration that the world has ever seen. How could things possibly be that bad?
And that's where we come back to this thing about like the RNC being the biggest game of inside baseball, right? Because like just the whole thing with like attendees showing up with like the same ear bandage as Trump, with like the weirdo speeches, with like all the various figures in right-wing media and politics, coming on and doing the same song and dance where they've had nothing but W's handed to them every day of their lives, and they still need to play the victim.
Well,
That's
and the whole theme going in, right, was the media was ready to just like bend over and just suck them off to climax like 20 times through Sunday, right?
yeah,
Like their candidate has just been shot. All of the like he's going to he's going to unify this country at last. This is a new party, and they throw it all away immediately. They can't help themselves. I've already seen some of their attack lines against Kamala Harris. They're going after her because she hasn't, she's not a mother. Her adopted children, or not adopted, her stepchildren don't count. She didn't give birth to them. All these things where it's like these super niche, like cultural fixations that will mean nothing, but they can't help themselves. They don't care who they offend, and like it's going to cost them votes. And Bosa's convention, I mean, there's one speech that I think is I mean, you put on the outline too, that I think is worth maybe talking about a little bit more just for its like overall context. But as it like, I mean, Trump's speech was 2 hour, almost like 2 hours. It was long. It was rambly. He was tired, which I mean, it was like 10 at night. I guess that's fair, but it was really bad. And yeah, there was like maybe a little bit at the start where he's, honoring the firefighter who died at his rally, right? Which I mean, I'm not going to say anything about, the victim there. But he's honoring him, but in a very self-serving way.
right.
Of course, and it's like he dodges the shooting because he's a genius, of course, and just looked away at the right time to survive certain death, and all that. But he just gets into like the divisive stuff, right? It's oh, we're being invaded by illegal immigrants. A little bit of unity, black and Hispanic jobs are being taken by illegal immigrants, who are invading from all corners of the globe. Just like everything like that you've heard like a million times. And it was so incoherent because like he would finish something and then he would like wind back to it like 20 minutes later for no reason. And again, these are things that like
Trump.
yeah, it's like these are things that like, okay, when his opponent's Joe Biden, maybe it's not like totally fair to hammer just him about this, but like you can't ignore this when he's like the only old doddering man in the race now. Like, yeah, Kamala can be a little cringe. It's a little different than full-fledged just insanity.
And we'll probably get into this a little bit, right? But it's like Trump identity for himself by standing in opposition to like probably one of the widest Republicans in 2016, right? And had basically like through that crucible and this new MAGA faction within the American conservative movement and how it's cozied up with the Republican establishment, right?
Mm-hmm.
for better or worse, is the face of the Republican Party, and that is weighing on the Republicans as a whole, and it's weighing on Trump because it's like he can only exist in opposition to something other, and his base is, Biden, because they would personally antagonize each other. Now, I don't think he has the report or I don't know how it's going to play out to personally antagonize.
I don't think we're ready for what he has to say about Kamala Harris.
I'm not excited. I'm not looking forward to
I mean, and I'm not saying that like, oh, it's going to be like these dudes. I mean, like there are going to be words that you've like only seen on like 4chan that are
they're bringing slow from the worried about that. Oh my god! But
he's too undisciplined.
I don't know. And the other thing is, I've been following the Varn vlog a bit, and they've been having some great discussions about like the state of the current American left and stuff, right? And one thing they were talking about with onto the Republicans is that the Republicans also don't really have a backbench. Like they kind of were able to, we talked about the lack of a backbench in the Democratic Party, but then when it comes to the one,
I think the Democratic backbench, I think it's really more so it's like on like the left wing or of the party that seems to lack it. I think the main party, it's really easy, I think, to like just start rotating in like those governors and stuff like that. But the Republican side, I mean, if had Trump actually died from that assassination attempt, last week would have been utter chaos. I don't know who would have won that nomination, right? Like there would have been like all of his VP shortlist folks would have been like claiming that they were like the true heir apparent. They have, his will written, like, what I mean? It would have been utter chaos. Everyone would have eaten each other apart. He obviously settled for Vance, and Vance, I think I don't think he was a strategic choice for like the election, right? People hate JD Vance. It doubles down on like, far right extremism and not like the kind that Mike Pence did where, like this is the bone to your evangelical types who may be a little weary of having this antichrist figure at the top of their ticket.
Oh my god. And we have a lot to say about Vance. We'll get to him soon, but I think the most interesting take I've gotten on Vance so far from other shows and whatnot is that like, is he going to be positioned to be the next Mitch McConnell, especially when, based on like the performance in the House of Representatives this year, the Republicans as legislators are just doing exceptionally poor.
Yeah. They're doing poor. The only reason I think you're like with Democrats that you don't really see a ton of like, I think Mark Kelly has been floated as a VP shortlist pick maybe, but like you're not seeing a lot of senators considered because like opening up vacancies is like bad right now, right? For the Republican side, like I mean obviously Vance is in the House, but like no one is like inspired by these folks. Vance, as I said, I think he was a strategic pick in and of the fact that like he's young enough that there seems to be kind of this renewed idea that whoever was VP is like next in line to be president, which historically hasn't really been the case, right? Like, I mean, that's
right.
A little more anomalous, right?
But Mike Pence.
Yeah, but there's, obviously, Mike Pence. Though obviously we only have to swap a couple letters around on the Trump-Pence signs to fix them for the current year. So that can save you a few bucks if you just want to go to the dollar store and put some sticky notes out. But I think he was a strategic pick to like put out a lot of his rivals in this most recent primary, right? Like I didn't think any of them had a realistic shot other than maybe like a Tim Scott or a Vivek, who are basically just running as like Trump proxies anyways, on the off chance that he like got arrested before, any of the primary elections. But I think that, or at least put in jail. I think he was technically arrested before the elections. But I think the idea, right, is just like it sort of locks up the party in a particular direction. And I don't think that direction's particularly viable, but we'll see.
Yeah, and it's again like picking Vance, like you said. I don't think formally nominated him to be the heir apparent to Trumpism, nor has Vance formally accepted. I think it's I guess I don't know. 'Cause what do you want to target first? Do you just want to get into the full unhinged JD Vance rant, or do we want to talk about Sean O'Brien first? They'll feed into each other. Don't
You know
worry.
what? Yeah, let's go into Sean O'Brien.
Okay, and
So
then
did
we'll
you
come back to
watch this?
Vance.
Yeah, did you watch his speech at all?
No, I've kind of been able to keep away from viewing anything longer than 2 minutes for this year's RNC,
Okay.
but I saw all the discourse about the speech.
Yeah, so I watched his whole speech. So Sean O'Brien, for those who may be unaware, president of the Teamsters union. He was there to put the social in National Socialism. I don't think he did a great job of it personally. Though I did
Just
see.
to recap on Sean O'Brien, right? Is that coming out of this like somewhat resurgent wave of labor actions in the
Yeah.
Biden, right? Like he comes out as this kind of like breakout star in liberal media circles because he is basically willing to get into a fist fight with who's the senator from Oklahoma?
Mark Mulvaney.
But yeah, he's basically threatening to get into a sparring match with Mike Mulvaney in like the Senate hearing, and you got Bernie Sanders trying to shut the shit down. So it's like
Yeah, he was O'Brien was his witness for the congressional hearing.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and like I mean, in right the resurgent labor thing, right? I mean, for all of his other faults, Biden has probably been one of the most pro labor presidents. Period. Um, like, I mean, with some of his
With the bar being
appointments.
exceptionally low for the U.S. in general. Let's just
Right. I
start
mean, it's
there.
low, but I'm like, he's had great appointments to the the National Labor Relations Board and other things like that. Joined the picket line, which I think was a first as well. Like, I mean, the bar is low, but like pretty pro labor. And Sean O'Brien's speech at the RNC is like, he's talking about how there's like a knee-jerk reaction that's anti-union in both parties. The stuff that was like good in his speech, which was like, I mean, pretty basic, like Union 101 stuff. That stuff got like no applause lines, but when he would say like, oh, hey, like, I think Josh Hawley and JD Vance are great for like taking a rhetorical stance on like supporting us against like Amazon and stuff like that.
And that was
Amazon
part of the speech that, yeah.
Yeah, like, and Amazon's a good punching bag because, conservatives hate Jeff Bezos, but like, it's because their understanding of like elites and stuff like that, it's not rooted in like this concept of like the bourgeoisie at large. It's rooted in a few bad billionaires who think that DEI is a good idea, right? That's their conceptualization of, that stuff's bad. I think a lot of like, maybe I looked too into this. I didn't see a whole lot of people upset about it, but like the way Sean O'Brien talked about the American worker and stuff like that in a certain tone that kind of struck me as like, we're getting a little like, skirting around a little racism, maybe. And stuff like that, right? We're really trying to get, which, like, okay, I get that it's this audience, but like, again, why are we here for this audience? Where it's like, oh, Josh Hawley's pro-labor because he has changed his mind on right to work, which has never come up for a national vote where we could actually, hold him to the record on or anything like that.
Right. It's the same thing with like Trump being allegedly like the anti-war candidate. Okay, I'll believe it when I see it. It's the same kind of rhetorical nonsense.
Yeah.
Ironically, that is like the perfect segue to get into Vance. The one
Vance was someone else that we highlighted as well as like this pro-labor Republican. Which, and again, it's like you look at just kind of reiterate too, like with the votes, like even like the Teamsters pensions that had just come out to a vote, no Republicans voted in support of it, or like very few did.
Yeah,
and like here we are at the RNC, like talking about how like, oh well, both sides are can be bad to unions. It's like, no, like, I mean, there's very few Democrats that are really taking like anti-labor votes these days, right? I mean, there's maybe not everything is coming up to the floor that it should, but it's like there's a very clear divide in like which party is supporting labor versus the other.
Agreed, and I think it's like anyone who was trying to go on this weird defense of Sean O'Brien's appearance there with like he was trying with the power. Well, I'm sorry, the minute you praise Vance and Hawley,
yeah,
you lost all goodwill right in there. And I will say, and I'm saying this, like mostly tongue in cheek, right? Is that hey, the Teamsters did endorse Nixon. Just saying, but it's like
I think they also endorsed Reagan too, which he brought up in his speech.
Right, and it's like again, it's like American trade unionism. That history is when I say the left, we're talking about such a fucking like cohort of various people.
Unknowable.
It's unknowable, and it's also like people at various levels of proficiency and knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And I'm saying that as someone who's like a complete dumbass. Like, I only know certain things from the standpoint of these are vast fields I have no knowledge and experience about, right? But at the same time, much left flavored discourse in the United States is painted by these complex issues that people really don't know a lot about. History of the Soviet Union, labor movements within the United States, radical politics and the United States, right? Like just in the domestic context, there's like a whole slew of events that are both underreported upon and also like just very poorly taught in most people's educational experience. And then the only is by going full like freak mode and just like reading a scaring amount of books about the subject. You're completely alienated from the population because you know it, right? But like, the history of American is entirely complicated, and I think what gets left out of so much mainstream coverage and people's conception of this discussion, right? Like just coming from like American labor is still trapped in the confines it made in World War II, right? It's bound by like the shackles of Taft-Hartley, and then afterwards, right? And it's also bound by the reality that ideological and persecuted from the union, specifically the Teamsters, was one case of that, right? Where it's like, and left-wing thought within the unions has been purged systematically at this point, and we're seeing people come back into it. Elements like the DSA and other socialist orgs, like come back, and there's varying degrees of success with that. But Frank, that's the context for American trade unionism, right? So someone kind of being like, hey, I thought unions were left. Conceptually, you can view it that way, but it's far more loaded and far more convoluted than that. You can't really things as good and bad, right, lefts, as easily as one would like as a consequence of that, right? So, like, I think, and this is actually going to segue beautifully into the discussion about Vance, right? Is that I've been finally, after years of trying to pick up this book, I've finally made some headway in text, Top Down, which is a text about the Ford Foundation.
You were about to say Hillbilly Elegy, but okay.
Is actually like the dark inverse that comes out of that thought. We'll get into that. I think we're just gonna have an extended on JD Vance and fuck him and his form of thought, right? But basically, like we talked on this podcast in the past about how like unpacked to understand a lot of modern political discourse, right? And I think this Fordist compact that America had of mass production for mass consumption exists at this, of the American state and American industry, World War II onwards, right? Where you this massive level of cutting edge technology from the private sector, along with technocratic management and, governmental power at the American state and the military industrial complex. And the Ford Foundation kind of comes out of the Ford family's desire to launder their money for tax purposes. Let's start. 90% of their money fucking goes into this thing to free it up from tax. But I think Henry Ford II decides that, because coming out of this tradition, right, he sees himself as this emergent liberal. He believes in this collaboration of private industry and the modern state, and the best intentioned and educated elites of his era to put their powers towards fixing society's ills. And the way they did that at home and abroad is kind of create this idea of these oppressed people need to be given something to stop racism as a national security concern, because it makes us look bad in front of the communists. It presents a real fucking risk to the hegemony of the liberal project. So we need to throw money at this and create this weird crucible where I mean the book at this point is kind of doing this weird theory where it's the of the Ford Foundation. It's their weird theory that if you look at this myth of and cities as these major centers of accumulation and acculturation and integration, right? New people come in and become American by coming to these cities. We now need to create these crucibles within these cities where people can come up to speed with what it means to be American. And what that means for, specifically in this case, New Mexico, Puerto Ricans, Black people coming up from the South during the Great Migration, and mountain whites, specifically Appalachians, which is the J.D. Vance connection. We need to create these crucibles for these backwards.
Aesthetically, it's not really
aesthetically, right? He's from Ohio. We'll get into that. But it's we need to get these people up to speed with what it means to be an urban WASP, compete on our level, and then we will create a leadership cohort that manages that block for us. Text of the book so far. I still got to finish it. But that is the Fordist Compact. And this idea of race under Fordism was the best way to manage the contradictions and improprieties of race and poverty brought about by our, right? And because people remember quite fondly the sheer super profits being, doled out back to American workers, the ease of American life, and, the availability of goods, there is this memory that comes back among boomers, particularly, who are the biggest beneficiaries of this, right? Of do that again. And you have that kind of come up both with the American left and the American right, where the American right turn to that with the understanding of it doesn't matter if all the shit that we were doing that time to paper things over was bad, or the exploitation inherent in those processes was bad. We should go back to it regardless. And then you have the Bernie Sanders-ite movement, kind of, right? Which is bring back the New Deal almost. We should bring back the Fordist Compact. That's not exactly what they're asking for, but in
sure.
If you ask people to describe their policy positions, that's what they're asking people to return to, right? So Vance, and specifically Sean O'Brien in this case, right, when they talk about the American worker, when they talk about this, this compact and, recompense for work, of course, they're talking about something they are speaking to experiences in the modern, day. Let's not understate that. But the bait and switch here is that they are also hearkening back to a form of capitalism existing prior to neoliberalism. That's one that like has already out for obvious reasons because it doesn't produce the same level of profits. I'm not a proponent of neoliberalism, but that's why it went that direction. And then the second, fact of the matter in that is for the right, it presents a resurgence and return to social conservatism, of racial separatism, of a return to old gender norms, of a push towards sexual repression. You're seeing that with they want to campaign on ending no-fault divorce, which was like Reagan's project of all things, right? Just ridiculous things like this. But then for Sean O'Brien to go down that, a kind of flies in the face of new pushes within the American labor movement to kind of counter some of those instincts, but also it is a kind of run back to the arms of management, right? Corrupt or more so like just very dishonest deals between like union officials and businesses seek out profits and kind of screw over workers in the process. And you have varying degrees of that with like the Reuther era of the UAW to like collusion with the mob and the Teamsters pensions. Like there's a complex history here, and I hope I've done some of this history justice. I have been breathlessly ranting for what seems like 10 minutes.
I think that was good, and I think it's like some of it with like the sort of you alluded to a little bit too of like a lot of Vance, right, is the idea. It hasn't exactly been a 4-on-1 with the Republican Party for a while, which is like sort of a pro-laborish posture kind of through the lens of anti-immigration, right? Like it's brown people taking your jobs. That's the problem. There's an ad I show to my students from his campaign where it just opens up, "Are you a racist?" But he sounds like way more giddy than that line ever should be spoken with. And whatnot. And it's just like, it's, like the idea that like, we're against it because of, stealing our jobs. Also, opioid epidemic and stuff like that. It mentions his mother who acquired those said opioids because she was a nurse and stole them from her place of employment. But that's neither here nor there. But that's kind of a lot of it. And like, he's not like meaningfully, and like again, like on the right, we're seeing a little bit of push against like certain corporate hierarchies, but very much it's like kind of this team sports style one, right? It's like some companies are bad. These are the companies that we have like loosely identified as being woke because they featured a trans person in an ad or a drag queen, or because they have a DEI initiative in their company. And we've talked about this before, and probably ad nauseum and stuff, but like that's really kind of where this supposed like populist pro-labor thing is coming shape from, and it just doesn't. It's just not particularly persuasive.
Yeah, and I'm sure like people have argued more effectively, or they take the Jay Sakai angle of like settlers and the myth of the white working class.
Exactly.
That stuff has all been, argued before, but I think what you're speaking to is spot on of like this invocation of a separate, distinct white working class, not only obvious, racial category, but also specifically as like a cultural presentation. Once again, comes back as another avenue to represent this and intensify the divide, but also like, I mean, I feel like I'm rehashing a lot of the JD Vance discourse from back when it run and when the Hillbilly Elegy film was out, right? So a lot of this has already been said this on the show before or in other places, but I mean, of study of Appalachians or of rural white communities as like the hinterlands or internal colonies of the United States in the sense like impoverished black neighborhoods or reservations or other, formations in the US, right? Studies as like, this concept. JD Vance had like he taught in liberal intelligentsia before. I don't know when he made his right wing push, because he writes Hillbilly Elegy a long time ago.
Yeah, I don't remember either, and I think it's probably worth doing a deeper dive into him, maybe some point prior to the election, kind of a more dedicated sense, just because like he does kind of have that interesting and somewhat repeated story as well, right? I mean, he's not like the only person to kind of make that transformation.
Yeah. Like I think there is definitely this weird like you never see like right wingers shift left and then be like, "Yo, I had all the wrong ideas. Like, here's how I was wrong." I wish
there was this article I just read from Politico yesterday, which I think it was like one of the most like I mean, Politico is like great for content like this, but it was about how like how he saw like his fandom of Lord of the Rings is like key to his conservative ideology, and they like interviewed him and like some other conservatives about Lord of the Rings, but like they all like to the extent there's like some ideological diversity on the right, it's like they all like have very different reads of it, which I don't necessarily know what like about Lord of the Rings would make them inherently like what I don't see it as a particularly conservative piece of literature.
Did they even read it, or did they just talk about the movie?
I don't know for sure, but like Rick Santorum was like, oh, like I love it, and it's like I see like the whole like journey from the Shire. It's like you got to like storm the gates of Mordor or whatever the real world allegory is at any given moment, as opposed to just standing by and let it happen. Whereas Vance is like his reading of Lord of the Rings is somehow like just leave the world alone and just stay put, which I don't know where, like, I can at least understand the, like, interventionism aspects. I mean, a little weird, but, like, if you truly believe that you're kind of in this, like, moral crusade, which the right often does, it makes sense. But, like, I don't get where Vance's reading of it leads him at all.
Well, yeah, I don't understand Vance's. I mean, he's an incredibly difficult nut to crack because he can never figure out people parasocially, but if you just go off of Hillbilly Elegy alone, the picture he paints, and I've other podcasts have covered the film review. A lot of jokes have been made about Vance and like this kind of like, I mean, if you want to shorthand for JD Vance and his, what he's saying about his mother in Hillbilly Elegy, it's the same shit that Eminem's. Every time Eminem disses his mom, it's the same nonsense. To be honest with you,
yeah.
But it's like it's I don't know. Like there's even like I forget which conservative columnist it was. I think it was Kevin Williamson who was like Kevin Williamson had this thing about like I survived abortion because I was adopted instead of aborted, and it's like okay, poor you, but like. JD Vance goes on this similar angle of like, because my mom was an addict, I struggled at Harvard. It's like, fuck you, buddy. Like you went to Harvard, you had to figure out what champagne was. Of course, like everyone has to go through the adjustment period of dealing with
finding out what champagne is. Yeah.
Right. Like everyone has to deal with bourgeois people and you go through that. That's you're not special, but like his ability to present this weird aspect of Appalachian white people as unique and they face like a certain kind of like societal depredation that prevents them from being like fully integrated with the rest of American society. It is his own spin on the Fordist model, because the Fordist model was also like black communities are uniquely depredated and they require intervention so that they can more readily integrate with American communities. while also papering over the fact that these places have been, exploited and capital's been pulled out. And you can say the same with Appalachia too, right? But it's like, what the push JD Vance makes is he kind of like sets up first with liberals and then with conservatives this idea of, this is the quote unquote white working class. These are the this is the Trump country you liberals refuse to hear from kind of shit. And then he's also able to market this kind of like, I mean, in hindsight, Vance and DeSantis kind of overlap, I would say 80% on a couple things, or at least on most things, I'd say, right? When it comes down to like social conservatism and fighting woke. JD Vance was big on fighting woke capital. And I think he was the one to kind of bridge this gap of like, let's bring back this Fordist profit sharing kind of regime, right? Of like, sharing the spoils of industrialism back to the workers while rebuilding like, the American nuclear family, which we've already talked about in other episodes, and other scholars have also pointed to how like that was an invention of Fordism, that you can have a nuclear family supported on one salary, and I think
which is a very weird, like, I mean, it makes sense to kind of like re-pursue that, but like it's not remotely practical.
It's not, and I think like the genie is out of the for positive directions, right? That like I don't think
positive and negative directions. Frankly, I think the genie's out of the bottle for.
That is also true, right? But I think like the thing is like the nuclear family gets presented by conservatives as if it was this like universal, eternal category, right? When it never was. Family units have always been somewhat more communal and much larger in the past, and then nuclear families kind of come about because of industrialization and what have you. But I mean, that's where JD Vance comes out of, right? He's the Appalachian whisperer to liberals, and then he is the opponent of woke capital to the right. And I think, and again, like he presented himself as anti-Trump in the past, and we all knew that, like, okay, this guy's gonna fold on Trump the minute
he presented himself, as much as he was like closeted anti-Trump.
Well, he's in the closet, all right, but
but I mean, like, I don't honestly know how like broadly broadcasted those views were, and obviously, like, American Hitler was like probably like the big one, which maybe now is like,
now it's an endorsement.
Like, yeah, I was like, maybe now it's like, now it's flipped.
Yeah, but it's like everything about JD Vance is he is the same kind of smarmy as Ron DeSantis to me. But I think, like, just having that kind of non-reptilian ability to, work, like, having been an author, having presented his stuff in media, having been through the ringer of, like, the Ivy League, he knows how to present himself.
You say that, but I just saw him today give a speech that was like straight out of Jeb Bush's playbook. He was like talking about how, like, dude, yeah, like I'll send it to you after this to watch. It was embarrassing.
Actually, because wasn't there a picture of him at the picket line, and also he was looking?
Oh, there's a whole video, like, because there's a person that he's with, and he, like, she goes like for like she clearly doesn't want. Oh, this one right there.
He's looking rough. Yeah.
But the older woman, Marcy Kepter, I think. Yeah, she was like, first time here. It's like, oh yeah, first time. And then she, like, because she doesn't want like shake his hand, she goes for a fist bump, and he like shakes her fist.
Oh no! Oh no!
And then there's this. I don't know if you can bring it up, but this is his.
Okay, I see it. Let's take a look.
The crowd is dead for this.
Oh no!
It is the weirdest thing to me. Democrats say that it is racist to believe. Well, they say it's racist to do anything. I had a Diet Mountain Dew yesterday, and one today. I'm sure they're going to call that racist too, but it's good. I love you guys. But
God, laughing at his own joke too.
I'm gonna splice that clip in. That needs to be in. Oh my god. This guy sucks.
I mean, the fact that he's going to that playbook, like, I mean, I was like, okay, that's like, you know, when he was campaigning for the Senate seat, that's a playbook he was going with. And it's like, dude, this is just what they're gonna do, is like these cheap jokes that you've heard a million times over. You know, and like, what's the next speech? He's gonna talk about how, like, you know, Kamala's stepkid identifies as an Apache helicopter or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, that's just where we're going with this.
Yeah, he's the same highly online inside baseball guy as like everyone in the RNC. So yeah. I don't know what he did to ingratiate himself with Trump. I know Trump was like, he has gorgeous blue eyes. I remember hearing that at least, but like,
he also said that he, I guess previously he said he doesn't trust people with beards, but he said that he likes his because it reminds him of Abraham Lincoln.
Oh my god! Yeah, don't because JD Vance, when he shaves, again, just everything they say about, like, you know, what a guy looks like after he shaves, it is completely true, especially with him. Just where?
Oh, ooh, yeah.
Yeah, he's. Oh my god, he does not look good. He needs
that like Matt Gaetz.
Yes. Oh my god, have you ever seen Matt Gaetz and JD Vance in the same room?
Matt Gaetz got Botox at the RNC too. Totally off topic, but I just, you know, I was like seeing his spitting image reminded me of that little fact.
Actually, low-key, I am thinking about this. When he was like the author of Hellbilly Elegy, yeah, he was clean shaven. Then the minute he needed to go conservative, he grew a beard for it. You're right. Oh my god,
it's weird.
Image is everything, right? Oh my god.
I guess so. Maybe Trump was right. Never trust a man with facial hair.
I just. And then I think the other thing too is, like, again, because this is like weird posturing towards like the white working class and like white people as like uniquely disappointed by liberal reforms and stuff like this, right? Like, I think there's a similarity to Clarence Thomas here in that, you know, you guys are basically advocating supremacy, but
you guys, Hillbilly Elegy is very like kind of like a little self-loathing and like deprecating of like where he came from too, right?
It's
like,
absolutely
in that like basically Clarence Thomas thing.
Yeah, because Hillbilly Elegy is him basically saying, "Fuck y'all, I got mine." Like, that's basically the plot of the book. And then I think the other thing too is, like, you know, JD Vance is almost going in, like, I mean, he's all but said that he's a white nationalist. Like, how do you square the circle that your wife is Indian? And then you had amazing cope from Vivek Ramaswamy, of all people, where he was like, yeah, you know, me and JD Vance, we grew up on the same block. It's, you know, we're almost the same, man.
Oh, I forgot they do have that Ohio connection.
Yeah, just being from Ohio and shit, right? But like,
yeah.
I mean, it is the funny thing too, where it's like JD Vance, like, he tries to set himself up as this like urbane, you know, elite white guy with an ethnic wife, and then he just couldn't resist the siren call of you know, Republican PAC money. That's what this seems like to me at the end of the day.
Could be, yeah.
And just, oh my god, I don't know. I don't know how you.
Probably.
I think the craziest shit I saw was like all the weird rhetoric about like, yeah, but his wife's Indian. It's like, yeah, but she's an upper caste Hindu who looks white. You know, she's, you know, I think they stand.
I guess. I guess like the facial features and whatnot, kind of.
I think it's just that weird dog whistle of like, as long as you're like an acceptable population, you get to stand on the same footing as white people, and I'm like, I don't like this. I don't like.
And turns out even those people, right? Not acceptable for all the folks in the Republican Party these days.
Oh my god, no! Because even then, there was like this weird, like, I don't know.
Nick Fuentes lost it.
Nick Fuentes, yeah, because wasn't there like a Sikh prayer at the RNC for some reason, and then like all the Nazis lost it because of that. I remember something like that. I don't know. I'm at a loss for words now. I think
I think this is a good note to probably close things out on then.
It's like this is a live fucking wire. I don't know what to say. When it comes down to Vance, right? Like, I know I've had my unhinged rant on Fordism finally, but like, for all political rhetoric now is like, how do we pretend to have Fordism without the subtle admission that we're never actually going to get it back? And moreover, was it ever sustainable to begin with?
Sure. Yeah.
So I don't know. With that being said, did you think you fell out of a coconut tree? You exist within the context of everything that exists and everything that came before you.
I don't know if I've fallen yet, but I'm ready to fall out of the coconut tree.
Oh my god. No, my coconut is cracked. This is just oh my god.
It's so funny. Like a last note that I'll kind of like offer, I guess kind of in general, but particularly on Kamala, is like it's so interesting how like I feel like K-Hive has just been like completely co-opted, right?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't exist in whatever form it did exist, because like a lot of those folks were like Biden should stay in. And now it's just like everyone who's just like embraced Kamala as like a meme lord. And in some ways, right? I mean, perfect for like a modern presidential candidate, right? Like just having like a living meme, it fits for this generation in a lot of ways. As opposed to having to kind of create one out of Dark Brandon. Here we don't even have to, right? She just creates the moments.
That is the world bestriding figure we need right now. Napoleonic in a sense.
Yeah.
All right. So I mean, with all that being said, stay tuned for this one. Keep your eyes peeled. There's nothing to say in terms of predictions right now.
Who knows? Something shocking might happen in the next day or two.
I mean, okay. Like I'm just gonna check news real quick and record. Okay, because like. Okay.
Oh my god, Biden said no. I'm just kidding.
Let's see. I mean, again, this is still fucking like a live wire, right? Like we're getting updates on Gaza.
Right. Yeah.
There's a hearing about the Trump assassination attempt.
Yeah, the Secret Service stuff.
Yeah, so all that is still live. I think it's keep your eyes peeled, keep hitting the books, start a journal.
Yeah. I've been writing one for most of all of this year and like the last few days of last year, and it's been a really good experience. I would definitely recommend.
Good man. I need to get on that because I keep telling myself I'm going to journal this year and I don't.
Yeah, this was intended to start a long time ago, and I finally got around to it, and I'm pretty proud of myself for sticking with it.
And that's great because like. Honestly, like both with the podcast and with life, like I just have these moments of like amnesia and like just feeling like nothing's gonna fucking happen, and then something happens that like radically mind in perspective.
Nothing's gonna happen. That's why we've done like 2 emergency pods.
Exactly. Oh my god!
Where you've opened things with the same Lenin quote over and over again.
It's like I need to get over the fucking nothing ever happens mentality. Right. Exactly. Oh my god.
Man, life's so boring.
Psych. All right. Well, that's it for this one. Thanks for tuning in, dear listeners. We will have the Linktree link in our show notes. You know the spiel. You know what to do. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.